I'm very excited to welcome Gemini Wahhaj, celebrating the release of her debut novel, The Children of This Madness. It's a complex tale of modern Bengalis, one that illuminates the recent histories, not only of Bangladesh, but America and Iraq, told in multiple voices over successive eras. This is a story of Nasir Uddin and his daughter, Beena, and the intersection of their distant, vastly different lives. Gemini Wahhaj is a Bangladeshi American writer living in the US. She wrote this debut novel as a new immigrant in the US while she was a graduate student in the creative writing program at the University of Houston and as the war raged in Iraq. She was grateful to publish this novel last December in the 20th anniversary of the Iraqi War, or the war in Iraq. And it's about Bengalis living in Texas and their complicated history with both Iraq and the US. Wahhaj will be in conversation with Sonal, Kohli, and Nadim Zaman. Sonal Kohli grew up in Delhi and now lives here in DC. The House Next to the Factory, her critically acclaimed book of linked stories, was longlisted for the Tata Literature Live First Book Award, was a book of the year for the Hindu, the Hindustan Times, The Wire, and is a BBC Radio 4 book at bedtime. And we have copies available at the registers as well. Nadim Zaman is the author of the novels In the Time of the Others, The Inheritors, and the forthcoming Culture Shocks, and the story collection Up in the Main House and Other Stories. Born in Dhaka, Bangladesh, he lives in Maryland, where he teaches in the English department at St. Mary's College of Maryland. So please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose Gemini Wahhaj, Sonal Kohli, and Nadim Zaman.
Oh. Thank you, everyone, for coming out, and thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting. This is amazing. It's such an honor. I'll let Sonal and then Nadim open for me, and then I'll read a section. We'll each read sections from our books, and then we'll have a conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. I'm the author of the book, The House Next to the Factory. It's a collection of 9 interlinked stories set in India, which tell the story of a family and the house that they live in. Each story follows a family member or someone connected to that family, a tutor, a lover, a cousin, or a friend. And in this way, we meet 3 generations of this family. The old matriarch, her 2 sons, who are the owners of the factory, and the grandchildren. Her granddaughter, Kavya, is sort of the on and off protagonist of the book. We meet her at different junctions of her life. The first time we meet her, she's still in her mother's womb when the book opens in 1980. And then we meet her when she's 12 years old. And then finally when she's 30 and she's in Paris still trying to figure herself out. And in this way, the book spans 3 decades. And it sort of captures a changing India through the lens of this family and this house. They're characters who are still just emerging from or perhaps never emerged from the trauma of the partition. And on the other hand, they're characters who are reeling from the sudden material success that has come about during globalization. I'm going to read a little from one of the stories, which is titled 1 Hour 3 Times a Week. It's the story of Mr. Lamba, who's a tutor, and his 2 pupils, who are the grandchildren of the family. And it's set against the 1984 anti-Sikh riots in Delhi. Just to give a little bit of historical backdrop, Indira Gandhi, the then prime minister, was assassinated by 2 of her Sikh guards, and which unleashed like days of armed terror against the innocent Sikhs in the city, like the capital city, Delhi, where Hindu mobs attacked Sikhs, their houses, their properties, and eventually a curfew was called and a siege was laid. I'll read the last few pages from this story. Mr. Lamba was in the staff room correcting notebooks when Mr. Chatterjee came in and said, "Indira Gandhi has been shot by 2 of her Sikh guards." Everyone looked at him. Mr. Chatterjee liked attention. "She's critical. They fired at close range." The 3 other teachers gathered around him to learn more. Mr. Lamba went and stood at the back of the circle. After the lunch break, he went to the reception and gave the receptionist Raghu's father's number. The receptionist, Miss Patsy, had 3 fingers missing from her right hand. She dialed with the left one and passed him the receiver. Mr. Lamba cleared his throat. He told Raghu's father he would not be coming in that evening. He did not mention the attack. Mr. Lamba sat at home following the live broadcast of the state funeral. It was a warm, slow day in November. The radio was on the center table with the antenna at 45 degrees. The announcer said Mrs. Gandhi looked peaceful on her last journey. Mr. Lamba imagined her hooked nose sticking out of the garlands that had been put around her neck. His son lay on the opposite divan, catching up on the broadcast in between naps. The ceiling fan spun sluggishly. Over the next few days, Hindu mobs attacked and set fire to Sikh neighborhoods. Eventually, a curfew was called. There was no milk at home. Mr. Lamba drank black tea for the first time. He didn't like it. He wondered if his mother could tell the difference. During the day, he tied old newspapers in a bundle and put aside empty bottles and cans for the kabadiwala, cleaned the refrigerator, washed his scooter, and hoped that Satnam and his family were safe. So Satnam is Mr. Lamba's friend who we meet earlier in the story. He's a Sikh. When he went to Raghu and Anuj's for the tuition next week, he saw the Sikh-owned Campa-Cola factory gutted. A portion of the white building was covered in soot. The shutters were up, heavy padlocks hung broken. Pieces of furniture and shards of glass littered the compound. A dog lay near the gate, panting. "I hope everything was okay here, Meeraji," he said to Raghu's mother, who was at the dining table feeding the little sister Kavya a banana. "It looks like the mob got Campa-Cola," he said. Raghu raised his head from his notebook. "Sir, our veranda was full of burnt flakes. They kept falling from the sky. I caught some bits as they fell, sir." "Your name will live, Indra," Anuj sang, "as long as the sun and moon live." Mr. Lamba had heard the slogan on the radio. He cuffed the back of Anuj's head. "Do your sums." "We were fine, sir," the mother said. "But one of our Sikh workers from the factory came today with his beard shaven and hair cut, my husband told us. He managed it just in time to escape the mob." Mr. Lamba imagined Satnam without his turban and beard. After the tuition, he went to the shop. The shutter was down. For a few days, Mr. Lamba heard the boys hum the slogan as they studied. Mr. Lamba was driving back from the tuition. There was a greasy patch in the middle of the road. It shone and twinkled and looked like the large, elongated shadow of a teapot. He thought if he touched it, the grease would come onto his fingers, and he could smell and decipher what it was. In staring at the patch, he forgot to avoid it. He lost control of the scooter, and it swerved and fell on its side. The weight came crashing down on his left leg. A few men standing at the bus stop rushed to help. He winced when they tried to make him stand. His trousers had torn at the shin, and there was some blood marks. The men stopped a passing car, put him in the back, and asked the driver to take him to a clinic. The doctor tapped Mr. Lamba's chin and knee with his knuckles and tried to rotate the ankle. He took x-rays and put the leg in a cast. He applied ointment where Mr. Lamba had grazed his palm. Mr. Lamba was confined to bed just like his mother. His leg looked like a cement column. The midterm exams were close, and he worried about the 2 boys. So he requested his son to call Raghu's father and tell him about the accident. He also wanted him to check on Satnam, but thought that might be too much to ask. Lying on the divan, staring at the fan go round, he wondered about the patch of grease. Was it kerosene that a mob had used to burn the Sikhs and their properties? The doorbell rang. Mr. Lamba wrapped the shawl around him, stood up with the help of the crutch, and limped out to see who it was. The postman gave him a small brown parcel and made him sign on a paper. Mr. Lamba came back to the divan and opened the parcel. There was a ruled sheet inside, folded into four, a Campa-Cola bottle magnet, and a pocket-sized cricket bat that Mr. Lamba knew was Raghu's favorite possession. He ran his fingers over the smooth wood of the bat. He weighed the magnet in his palm. He put on his glasses and unfolded the letter. It was in Anuj's handwriting. "Get well soon, sir. We hope this leg is not hurting too much. We have a new tutor. He has a pointed thumbnail, and sometimes he pinches our ears. We missed you always. Yours obediently, Anuj and Raghu." Mr. Lamba folded the letter and tucked it under his pillow along with the bat and the magnet.
Good afternoon, all. So in case you're wondering what I am doing instead of that handsome fella in the poster, he is being missed. He's our friend Javed, who unfortunately was tested positive for COVID, and I'm pinch hitting for him. What an honor to be here. Thank you for welcoming me. So what I will be reading from is a work in progress. So this is my current novel, the working title of which is Treason. And it is also in the spirit of the works of which this is part today. It takes place in 1975 between Bangladesh and London, right after a military coup that year by a group of junior army colonels assassinated Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the president at the time. And then, that basically began 15 years of off and on military rule through 1990 anyway. So at the center of this is one of the fictional colonels, and his life as he and his planners, co-conspirators, are getting ready to carry out this assassination, and then his life in exile, during which time he meets a woman who is a survivor of the Holocaust, and we get to see them kind of have a bond and a personal relationship, which is still being written. So this is from the prologue of Treason, and the prologue is titled High Crimes. The trial concluded, the two men sat alone. Colonel Omar Qureshi was officially a prisoner of the state. Brigadier General Humayun Reza had gone from being the colonel's oldest friend and fellow officer to his warden. A court-martial had found Colonel Qureshi guilty of conspiring against the nation, inciting a coup, and the high crime of the murder of the president. "A drink would be nice, but we'll have to settle for water," said Brigadier Reza. "I don't think even water will taste right in this place," said Colonel Qureshi. Clinking glasses, they avoided meeting eyes. Too much history there to warp whatever nuance they had to keep alive in order for this strange new arrangement between them to have its enforced meaning. "The bastards don't even consider that I could break you out of here," Brigadier Reza chuckled into his glass. "Who would defy my order out there?" Every last man, Colonel Qureshi thought, if they were worth the uniforms they wore, the oath they had sworn. You wouldn't even go if I tried," Brigadier Reza said. "You son of a gun." "Why?" said Colonel Qureshi. "Where would I go?" "Well," said Brigadier Reza, setting down his glass with an echoey bang on the desk where the tribunal had sat. "For now, house arrest." The house was in Old Dhaka near Lalbagh Fort, where Colonel Qureshi's great-grandfather built it in the year of the Sepoy Mutiny. Though Colonel Qureshi had not visited in decades, he'd paid for its upkeep by trusted, retained veterans in the service of his family. Inam, the head caretaker, was the grandson of the man who had served the colonel's grandfather in the same capacity. Inam and his family and 6 other servants lived and worked in the house, and they were lined along the driveway like a reception committee when the colonel's car arrived. The neighborhood had changed from when the colonel was a child, as was to be expected, but the transformation was so brutally disappointing it saddened the colonel's heart. Like the rest of the city, it was overcrowded and appallingly filthy in certain parts. How humans lived in them had to be seen to be believed, and yet those were the areas most densely packed. The beautiful narrow lanes lined with shops and homes were plagued with open drains. Refuse and garbage knew no bounds. Trash cans overflowed with rotting waste. Once regal mansions like the colonel's family home languished and crumbled or were taken over by unscrupulous merchants who paid the police a bribe to look away, or by squatters. Colonel Qureshi was aware that the city needed a major cleanup and beautifying agenda, and the late president had often talked about putting such a plan into urgent action. An expansive one Colonel Qureshi had heard him talk about, but nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened was the country's unofficial motto. Inam leaned down to touch the colonel's feet, then bullied his wife and children to do the same. Brigadier Reza chuckled at Colonel Qureshi's discomfort, then himself became the subject of the treatment. He was not as tolerant as the colonel. "Stop it," he barked, and shooed them off. "You can be a little nicer," Colonel Qureshi said, as they entered the house. "They go back generations with my family." Brigadier Reza made a chuckling, throaty sound, familiar to the colonel as the notes of his dismissal. Reza's lifelong way was to condescend to everything that he didn't agree with. And it didn't stop there. Just disagreeing wasn't enough. He had to go the extra and belittle. "Tell me," Brigadier Reza said in the living room, bringing out his pipe and settling into a chair, "which prisoner of the state anywhere in the world gets to have what you're getting?" It was a statement in the cadence of a question. Awash with memories, Colonel Qureshi didn't reply. On the grand piano stood arrayed the row of pictures in their frames from the colonel's family, exactly as the colonel recalled them from his childhood. His grandparents on both sides, his parents on the day of their wedding, his two brothers, from whom he'd been estranged since they were much younger men, the brothers' wives and children, uncles, aunts, cousins, relatives and friends, lifetimes and lives he hadn't thought about again until now. "Since we're off the record," Brigadier Reza said, "and if we're not, I'm placing us off the record. I'll be the first to acknowledge you did the country a service." His pipe smoke was quickly filling the room, and the smell wasn't pleasant. Colonel Qureshi hated smoking of any kind. The day he crowned himself president from prime minister for the final time, Brigadier Reza lectured, was the day he signed his own death sentence. Don't think I don't know right. Don't think I didn't know right that second what was going to happen. Colonel Qureshi picked up the picture of his parents. They always looked so young to him, unlike he could ever imagine them. And now they look like children playing adults. The colonel was often told, more the older he got, that he was a copy of his father. He saw it now, and it scared him. "But you being among the ones that did it," Brigadier Reza continued, "I wouldn't dream in 1,000 years." He pulled pensively on his pipe, perhaps rethinking that assumption. Then again, who knows what lurks in our hearts, we band of brothers, that is. Brigadier Reza had gotten enormous at this advanced stage in his career, as if caring for his health was a trouble. Once a vigorous athlete, now he suffered from persistent aches and pains. His uniform didn't fit. Colonel Qureshi wondered if he'd become that careless as not to have it tailored at the bare minimum. The flesh in his cheeks were as swollen as the rest of him. Bulges cupped his eyes. He looked ill. "I just wish I'd seen what was in yours earlier," Brigadier Reza finished. He fixed on Colonel Qureshi, waiting for explanations. Colonel Qureshi wouldn't know where to begin. Not even to himself could he recount the past year with any coherent meaning. "So do I," he said. Brigadier Reza arched an eyebrow and surprised his old friend, adding a lively titter to complete the reaction. He rose from his chair with no small amount of effort and opened the shutters on the nearest windows. The view was of the lawn in the front of the house, the driveway and the gate. Jackfruit and mango trees planted by Colonel Qureshi's grandmother surrounded the lawn. In the hottest of days, their shade cooled the lawn and made it a favorite spot for afternoon tea. "That is when we know we are in trouble, isn't it?" Brigadier Reza said, dropping back into his chair with a hint of irony so subtle it blended with his smoke and swirled into the nothingness before its effect could be felt. Both men knew the basic difference between them. Colonel Qureshi had acted on what was in his heart, and Brigadier Reza, his suspicion that something was brewing notwithstanding, would not commit treason. Colonel Qureshi knew this about him as long as he had known him. They'd squandered hours and hypotheticals in their years as green young officers, late nights leading to pre-dawn days, twisting into dizzy, sleepless bickering. What would they do if a time were to come in their lives that they found themselves standing against events they had only known in history books? How would they conduct themselves if the country went spiraling into another turn to tyranny? Would they choose sanity or douse ablaze with fuel? Well, said Brigadier Reza, going over such things are 1,000 years behind us. He pushed out of his chair after 3 bouncy attempts, wincing as he wobbled to his feet with unseen pains. This is a damn shame, he suddenly grew despondent, and his shoulders drooped. Damn it, old chap, damn it. He pumped the colonel's hand, and as a last-second added measure, smacked his shoulder. Colonel Qureshi felt like a freshly minted second lieutenant receiving his commission. They stood clasping hands for a beat, and then Brigadier Reza was whistling out to his car. Around the same hour the following day, Brigadier General Reza would be dead, clubbed to instant death by a heart attack between dinner and his study. Colonel Qureshi got the news while picking at his lunch with no appetite. He had no way of telling who would be assigned to him next. He could think of a few contenders, only if the new government, under the army, really wished to be sadistic about it, as every possible replacement chilled the colonel's heart, which the government relished knowing they were putting him through. Thank you.
So we decided that we would read sections of our novel. So my novel is about the Iraq War. It's set in the US during the Iraq War of 2003, but it goes back to Bangladesh and Iraq, all in terms of times of disaster and war and political crises, and we thought that that would be the thread across our works. So this is, I'm going to shorten it so I can read till the end of the chapter, but this is about a time when this Bengali family is living in Iraq, a Bangladeshi family is living in Iraq during 1975 to 82 and leaves during another war, the Iraq-Iran war that starts in 1980. This is called At the Bottom of the River Tigris, and I will shorten the chapter but read till the end. The dust of the desert never settles. Just as Iraq grew from a country of Bedouin nomads herding camels, donkeys, and sheep to a modern land of bounty, soon that moment was taken over also. Summer returned. The air became hot and heavy. The sky grew thick with rumors. The Ba'ath Party became more hardlined. Dr. Saadi lost his job to a Ba'ath Party member who was many years junior to him because the party government desired his appointment. Saddam Hussein declared himself absolute ruler of Iraq. My students became dark-faced and disheartened. They met secretly in street-side shops under the cover of dark to sip bitter coffee in tiny cups, discussing the revolutionaries who had been imprisoned, tortured, and hanged, and those who had fled to other Arab countries or Europe. They whispered to me that people on the left were being disappeared daily, including some decent people inside the party. Then things took a turn for the worse. The Shuttle Arab was in dispute. Shockingly, trouble started with Iran, at first merely as exchanged insults and satirical cartoons of the Iranian ruler Ayatollah Khomeini dancing madly on TV. I asked the students, what is the conflict? They said that the Iranian leader had instigated Shia rebellion against Saddam Hussein, and there was dispute over territories. The fervor kept mounting, and in September, before our shocked eyes, a war started with Washington supporting Saddam Hussein and Libya, Syria, and Israel supporting Khomeini. The country where we had been living in peace for so many years changed before our eyes. Food became scarce, many items were rationed. Rahela, which is the wife, stood in long lines to collect whatever food was being given out on ration. As petrol became scarce, the government ruled that cars with even-numbered license plates were allowed on the road on one day, while cars with odd-numbered license plates were allowed to drive on the alternate day. The markets thickened with the Popular Army, formed by civilian volunteers signing up to fight against Iran. Don't you think this war is a mistake? I asked the Iraqi students. Even if Iraq defeats Iran, what will come of it? Both countries will be strained by the cost of fighting a war. Don't worry, the students assured me with big smiles. The war will be over in a few days. The male students, young men with bright eyes and tufted dark hair, started joining the army and going off to war. In a photograph taken with me before the war, they're standing tall with their chests out, stylish, holding cigarettes at an upward angle in their hands, looking modern and intellectual. We moved to a flat in Babultop in the city, close to the children's school, public transportation, and the markets. The children were cramped for space, caught in the anxiety of the grown-ups. Rahila and I decided we had to leave. 8 years had passed since we had arrived in Iraq. Several coups had taken place in Bangladesh in the interim years. The Prime Minister Sheikh Mujib had been assassinated, followed by several unstable years and multiple changes of government. Recently, President Zia, the last in a long line of leaders, had also been assassinated. Rahila and I tried to make plans while we ate dinner. Lenin kept interrupting us. Abba, Amma, there's nothing to be afraid of in war. We shall die when God wishes us to. Rahila was irritated. Realizing that the children were vying for attention, I told them to watch the Polish cartoons on TV in the drawing room. After they left, a high-pitched siren sounded outside. The drawing room was next to the front street with windows facing the street. Lenin started to scream. Rahila and I rushed to the drawing room and picked up the children, dragging them away from the open windows. For the next few hours, we hid in the inner corridor of the building till the air raid siren subsided. After that day, we began to prepare to leave. Beena had dreams in which we almost reached Bangladesh, but we couldn't. Bangladesh was a dreamlike to my children, so fantastic that they could not believe we could actually go there. My youngest son, Kazi, pestered me with questions about the mechanics of traveling home. Abba, is Bangladesh in the sky? Why do you say that? Because Bangladeshis come here from the sky and they fly up into the sky. I smiled at my son's conviction, feeling satisfied that we would get home in no time. Once again, Rahila stood in line at department stores. This time we bought luxury items to carry home. Trousers that arrived in cartons from China, dinnerware, gold jewelry, Georgette saris, and showpiece Iraqi dolls dressed in traditional clothes. I bought a maroon brocade material and foam to make a sofa. We piled everything into our suitcases, determined to leave nothing behind. But our travel plans soon became complicated. When the first bombs fell on Mosul, the airport in Mosul shut down. Baghdad airport was also closed. The only way to leave the country was to take a bus to Kuwait and board a PIA flight from there. Most of my foreign colleagues had left already or were scrambling to get out. The Americans and the Europeans had fled the country long ago, rescued by their foreign missions. Only the unfortunate citizens of the Indian subcontinent remained. One day I went to collect my 3 children from school. Loud ululations could be heard in the house next to the school. The son, a young man who had served as a pilot in the war, had been killed when his plane had been shot down. Now hundreds of family members had gathered at the house as the dead body was carried in. From the road, I could see the fallen soldier's family sobbing uncontrollably. I took my children out of the school and began walking toward the parked car. Suddenly, air raid sirens began to sound above our heads. All around us, parents and school children jumped out of their cars and ducked low on the road. In a few seconds, planes swooped over our heads, accompanied by the loud cracking of aircraft guns from the road. My children covered their eyes and ears with their hands, crouching. Then I thought I heard the sound of a bomb falling. The explosion was louder than anything that could be imagined. Quick, before the planes could come back, my children and I flew to the safety of a neighboring house. An old couple with lined faces opened their door and ushered us in, leading us to an inner courtyard that was open to the sky. They fed us water and date cookies and calmed the shaking children. Speaking in a mixture of Arabic and broken English, they told us that their 3 sons had gone off to fight in the war against Iran. They had no idea about their sons' whereabouts. Later, I learned that a military base had been bombed that day. A few days later, we faced a major setback. The teenage boy who came to exchange our empty gas cylinders ran away with them. The cylinders were rationed by the government. I'm going to skip this part. Dr. Saadi asked me to come to his house to discuss a personal matter. We sat in his living room, paneled with rich wood and filled with bookshelves and fine cushions. Dr. Saadi served me bitter coffee in a delicate cup without handles and broached the subject matter for which he had summoned me. His younger brother, a pilot, had gone missing in action in the war. Dr. Saadi's family did not know if his brother's plane had been shot down, if he was still alive or dead, or if he was a prisoner of war in Iran. Dr. Saadi wanted me to try and find out about his brother's whereabouts from outside Iraq by writing to the foreign missions. When will this war end? I asked, feeling bad that I was escaping unhurt while leaving my Iraqi colleagues and neighbors behind. Dr. Saadi informed me that there were some people in the government desperately trying for a ceasefire with Iran. You said earlier one time that so many people on the left have left the country. Will you not leave? I asked. Dr. Saadi laughed, a sad smile, and ran his fingers through his thick hair. This is my land, Dr. Nasir. No matter what happens, I have given up my politics and my dreams. I am content to be able to kiss the soil of my country. He shifted his position on the sofa. The world will never allow there to be peace in Iraq because this land is too important to the region. The Iraqi people will never be left alone to determine their dreams without interference from the international powers. I'm going to skip again. In May, I took my family to Baghdad to buy new airplane tickets for our passage out of Iraq. I was successful in buying the tickets on the first day on a flight leaving in June from Kuwait airport. We were staying with some Bangladeshi friends in the city. That evening, to celebrate, we drove to a park in Baghdad, parking the cars beside a small pond. We enjoyed a small picnic sitting on a Syrian mat, laying out cucumber sandwiches, roast chicken, shish kebab, pickles, reminiscing about home and looking forward to leaving. My 3 children ran freely among the swings and slides. Still, a war was going on, and we did not want to risk an air raid, so we piled into our cars before dark, preparing to leave. A car rammed us from behind. I swore and got out of the car to examine the damage. The Pujo's body was dented badly. The children were in the back seat. After checking quickly that they were all right, I left my family and drove off in our friend's car, chasing the other car, which had backed up and sped off. I was determined not to let the culprit get away. We flagged down the car about a kilometer from the park and forced the driver to go to the police station with us. To my surprise, the driver was drunk and contrite. The police asked me for an estimated cost of the damages in dinar. I named a sum. The police obliged the other driver to pay the full sum. When I returned to the park in my friend's car, Rahela was screaming. Our youngest child, Kazi, had died of an internal hemorrhage. He looked spotless on the outside. I started to hit my head against the car's body, screaming soundlessly. Rahela and I buried our youngest child, Kazi, in Mosul. I lifted the surprisingly light box containing my son's body and descended into the dirt hole. I howled like a child and had to be carried away by my friends. I thought that my son had been swallowed up by the Tigris River to rest in peace at its bottom, forever frozen in time. A month later, we finally started our journey to Bangladesh with heavy suitcases and boxes tied with rope. From Mosul, we rode a bus to Baghdad, where we boarded another bus to carry us to the Iraqi border with Kuwait. In Baghdad, we were surprised to find beggars banging their alms cups against the windows of the bus. Our fellow travelers were mostly South Asians, laborers from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan with big eyes and frightened expressions. In disjointed voices, they told us about their harrowing journeys out of the different parts of the country. In the evening, the Iraqi bus reached the border with Kuwait and dropped us in the middle of nowhere. That night, we slept in an open field under the Iraqi sky. The next morning, we rose with the sun and hauled our luggage to the Kuwaiti checkpoint. After the Kuwaiti officials verified our papers, we boarded another bus that carried us to the Kuwaiti airport. Finally, after several days of travel, we were on a plane to Bangladesh. Once I was in Bangladesh, I tried to trace the whereabouts of Dr. Saadi's brother through various international agencies, but I was not successful in my efforts. In the end, I could not help Dr. Saadi in the one favor that the Iraqi professor had asked of me in return for all the kindnesses he had shown my family. In leaving Iraq, I left many parts of me behind. Long into old age, I woke up screaming from my sleep. The frowning face of my son Qazi, standing in the sun in a plump safari suit, accused me of leaving him behind. Qazi used to always be an angry child, full of frowns and commands. Rahila and I used to admire the boy's confidence. But now, my son turned his angry face toward me, standing in the sun with a forlorn expression, shielding his eyes with a small fat hand. Thank you to everyone for coming so much. We really want to know who's in the audience and talk to you. So I'll just open with one question to all of us, and we'll have a short conversation and then open it up. So I wanted to ask both Nadeem and Sonal about how politics, you think, intersects the lives or has for many, many years of the people of India, Bangladesh, our region.
As a writer, Gemini, I think my first instinct and interest is in capturing the ordinary and the everyday and writing about it. I find a lot of magic in these ordinary moments of day-to-day lives, and that's what I'm interested in writing about. But the thing is that ordinary lives do not take place in a vacuum, and there's always the social, the economic, the political affects the ordinary man as much as it affects people who are, up on the echelons. So I want to see how people who are not in the eye of the storm, who are on the periphery of these so-called events, are affected, how they process these events. I mean, it's not just a subcontinent, not just India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. I think it's everywhere that people are affected by the big events that are taking place, and more so now because it's a global world. And like in the story, 1 hour 3 times a week, the excerpt that I read from, Mr. Lamba is not directly affected by, he's not a Sikh, but he constantly keeps worrying about his friend who's a Sikh, the stationer Satnam. And even till the end of the story, we don't know what happens to Satnam, and nor does Mr. Lamba find it out. I mean, his first effect on his immediate life is that there's no milk in the house. I mean, I remember when I was quite small when this assassination happened, but since it's such an important part of the emotional history of the city, Delhi, where I grew up, I always wanted to write about it. And I didn't know how I would write about it, but while I was thinking about this story and I saw the figure of the Sikh stationer with his red turban and a pencil behind his ear, and the whole history of the riot, of the anti-Sikh riots filtered into the story through him.
What patterns do you see?
Yeah. The more I kind of live, the more I can't seem to separate just human evolution, human life in all its kind of levels and capacities from politics. And that doesn't mean, policy and what happens in the halls of institutions. So as a Bangladeshi, born there 5 years after the war of 71, every story I heard, every story around, at the family house, at the grandparents' home, had to do with the 1971 war. Everything, there was kind of like, all of this was going on, life was going on, and then 71 happened. It has its own name. So kind of my storytelling, the shaping of how I understood stories, filtered, to use your word, happened through that event. And it was many years before I wrote my first novel, In the Time of the Others, which uses that 71 as a backdrop with the kind of lives of people just kind of trying to go on. And in subsequent works, of course, including what I read today, and other works, I just can't seem to sort of separate some kind of engagement, some kind of question that keeps coming up, even if it's a story of a marriage or, story of a family going through some day-to-day, very kind of standard family complexities. Somehow the world informs it, the world in which it's existing, because it cannot be divorced from that world. And the moment it is, I think that heightens the conflict because the world will encroach.
Yes, that sounds really good. Yeah, when I was writing my novel, I think it was this impulse. I think one of my teachers asked me why I was writing this, and I said, "Oh, I can't leave it because every time I'm sitting in a living room in America, I'm thinking about what we're not talking about in the living room, and every year there's been something going on outside." We'd love to know more from the audience and who's here. It's so amazing to see everyone here, and what questions you have, and thoughts you have.
Hi, I'm Kurt. I'm Gemini's editor, actually. I'm just curious, how has the conflict in Israel and Gaza informed your thoughts of your book?
You mean post-writing?
Right.
Huh. I mean, Palestine was actually... So this novel, Kurt put it into shape, but this had everything in it. So Palestine was in the novel at some point. Because I think now it's a global issue, but when I was growing up, even in all generations, Palestine is such a present issue. For example, Palestinian students come to Bangladesh to study because Palestinian students have always come to Bangladesh to study. So the Palestinian struggle is so close. When I was growing up in Iraq, I don't know why, because it wasn't 1967, but I remember, it wasn't 1967, but I remember Iraqi soldiers going off to fight for Palestine. There were Palestinian refugees in Iraq. So it's not that I'm looking at it now in 2003, but Palestine has always been a part of my consciousness because I've met them all over the world, sort of scattered. When I was studying in graduate school, there was a Palestinian student with us in public policy school whose friends had all been killed. So it's just, I've never been to Palestine, and so to me it's, and to me it's a distant issue, but Palestinians have always been very much a part of my consciousness, my parents' consciousness. That's a great question. Any comments are great too, or just introductions. Oh.
I have a question for Nadeem. So while we were talking, you were telling us about your book, and I was intrigued that a part of the cast of the characters are real historical figures, and the other cast is fictional characters. So I want to know how you sort of bring these two disparate casts together and sort of braid them into a story. Sure.
Thank you for that question. It's something that, just from a writing perspective, I find really kind of fun to do, having historical figures speak with fictional characters. In my first book, I did the same thing. For example, the Pakistani generals, they were my fictional creation, but there were instances, like, for example, there was a dinner party where a general named Rao Farman Ali, who was basically in charge of the Eastern Command and was giving the orders out to round up Bengalis and to kind of keep the terror going on the ground, as it were. But he doesn't show up again. He just kind of says hi at the party and goes away. In this one, in fact, the military personnel are all fictional, So they have names, as we were speaking earlier. They have names, fictional names. However, when I go to the president and his family, and their kind of circle, that I don't give them names. So the president is known as the president or the prime minister, depending on the year for the 4 years that for the 3 years that he was president. In that time, he changed his title like 7 times. And so he goes between one or the other, and then the son's eldest, youngest, nephew. So that is something just new that I'm trying. And also it allows me to have more creative license with the fiction. And then when I do put in something that is historically factual, it's going to take the reader a little more to kind of engage with the book, which I invite readers to do, to understand, oh, did this happen? In fact, to as a preview, all of the kind of actions that happen, all of the historical markers that happen, they're all based in fact. It's just they don't have the name of the person doing it, but the prime minister, the time, the year. So I find it kind of creatively exciting and fulfilling to do. Thank you.
I'm curious about what writing the novels did for you as authors. So writing about trauma, writing about proximity to conflict, writing about just the density of politics. By the end, having written all that, were you feeling more optimistic, less optimistic, more cynical, less cynical? What did it do for you, the experience of writing the books?
I felt more empowered because as a writer, books don't change the world, but you feel like you want to document and you want to have your voice and fiction is so artistic, it's a form. So I really felt empowered and satisfied having put it into form and solved it for myself, even if it doesn't affect anyone. So it's a beautiful form. I love the short story even more, yes. But it's a beautiful form to have your thoughts and this documentation constrained in form. But writing political novels is very difficult because there's a dominant narrative. It's always intersecting with. So I had to go through 1971 because the characters were living through 1971. And I was like, but I don't want to tell the story of 1971. It's a dominant narrative. But then also when I was criticizing Sheikh Mujib, I was really scared, and I took out all those parts because I was like, well, what if I end up in jail? And it's really interesting because you're like, am I in the U.S. or am I in Bangladesh? Like, who's going to read this? Yeah. Like there could be a Khomeini moment where, especially with your book, with like historical characters. Yeah.
Hopefully.
I think when you write something that's political, you're always on the wrong side of someone. And that is a little scary, but as a writer, you do feel compelled to tell the stories that you want to tell. And somehow there's no getting away from that story that's niggling at you constantly.
Yeah, even in dinner conversations, I want to go to the place that you're not supposed to go to, right? So the thing that's dangerous is what you want to tell a story about. Yeah.
I like your choice of word, empowered. So as a Bangladeshi, first of all, to dig so deeply into this history of which I knew kind of surface level, but also family stories. That's what informed me. Lived events that I fictionalized and put in the first book. And there are aspects of this one too that has family connections and so forth. So not only did I dig deep, I turned it into a dissertation. So I found an opportunity to immerse myself in the literature, the history, the kind of personal histories, the memoirs, so forth. And so I needed to know and understand a lot more than I thought I did. And of course, as with learning and research, the more I learn, the less I know. But there's more for me to uncover and unpack. And to Gemini's point, Bangladesh, the dominant narrative, literally, it can change tomorrow. That is not hyperbole. There was elections in January, and Sheikh Mujib's daughter, Sheikh Hasina, who's been prime minister for 70 years, I think. But she got reelected. And so the story now is just her father's story, just the Awami League and the Sheikh Mujib story. No one else exists. If they do, then, they're erased out. So if Mrs. Zia, the widow of Zia Rahman, if she lives to see another term, then Mujib is going to be erased, and his photos are going to come down, and Zia's photos are going to come up. So this kind of nonsense is just, that's what it is. There's only so much of that can be tolerated. But at the same time, the young people I taught there between 2017 and 2018, I spent a year there finishing up my first book and teaching. The young people are ready and hungry, and they're not going to take any of this. They're not taking this narrative. They are ready to dig, to criticize, and kind of come what may. And so there's this kind of draconian thing called the Digital Securities Act that got passed in 2018. I still don't know how you name something a Digital Securities Act and then say it's to kind of ward off treason and anything against the state. It's like, what's digital about that? There's just kind of like, what story are we trying to tell? Currently, it's the dominant narrative, and I happen to push back. And fiction, storytelling can't have boundaries.
We have time for one more. Did this spark anything for anyone? Did they want to, yeah? All right.
Hi, thank you so much. Just in your last answer, I think you were referencing, you said like, oh, I don't know, am I in Bangladesh, am I in the United States? And it just kind of begged the question for me, I guess it's for everybody, but do you have an intended audience when you're writing, or are you, regardless of your intention, when you actually write the book and you do events like this, or you see people who read the book, are you, who is the audience? Are you surprised?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think for many years, as I was growing as a writer, I was trying to write for the audience, and it was just, it's a shifting, you never know who the audience is. And so I kept writing YA, and I was trying to like understand the American mind, and the pandemic was so great because I felt so isolated, and I didn't agree with anyone because we were totally isolated, and that was freeing because I finally realized who I am and what I believe in. And so I think I'm loving the book tour and talking to people, but from my first having said, this is how I see the world, and this is my fiction, and that's a great way to have a conversation. So I think the whole thing of because when you are publishing or trying to be a writer, they say, oh, you can't write for yourself, you have to write for your audience. That doesn't make sense. I think you have to first say, this is how I see the world, and then you're in conversation with other people. Of course, I read all the time, and I know what other people think, and I'm deeply interested in what other people think. But you have to write how you see the world, and that's what's unique.
I think for a writer, it probably unnecessarily problematizes the whole thing if you have to visualize and this fictional reader as well. For me, I think I try to tell the story of that character, tell it as truly as possible, and let the character be who they want to be on the page. And how it is read, how it is received, is something that happens much later on.
Ideally, everybody, my readership will look like this room and this place and this city. However, it has been really kind of heartening to have the books read a certain way by Bangladeshi and Indian and Pakistani readers, subcontinent readers, which has been fulfilling in its own way. And at the college where I teach, my colleagues in Asian studies have had my first novel in the curriculum since 2018. And so our institution, it's a liberal arts college, predominantly, it's a predominantly white institution, but the students, I go to their classes every semester, they blow me away with their engagement and their questions, and it's a different kind of engagement that I get. And I just, you know, it's almost like, as it is, if I could talk to every single person here about any book that you've read, you would tell me something new and different. And I get that joy semester after semester with these wonderful students. Lastly, a couple of weeks ago, I received an email from a PhD candidate at Oxford, and she wanted to reach out to me because my first novel is one of her primary texts in her dissertation. So I wake up to this and I go, somebody's pranking me. And then we have a conversation. My goodness, she told me things about the book that I didn't, realize was there. And so all I have to say to her is, it's yours. Please engage. So I'm always learning, and that is just what a tribute that is to all of us. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Let's give him a round of applause.